is Grant Steckman, and I will be discussing the topic of violent video games. So, if you want to surround yourself in a world of imagination and creativity and escape from a stressful day, video games could be the solution to relax and calm you down. When I was in middle school, I used to play a lot of video games after finishing my homework at a long day at school. These video games help me relax and take my mind off of stress in my life. Some people blame video games for youth aggression just because there's some violence, but if that was the case, books, movies, sports, and media would also be to blame for youth violence. So my major claim is violent video games have little to do in contributing to youth violence. And my three secondary claims are violent video games are not negatively affecting the crime rates in youth. Video games help manage anger and relieve stress rather than cause aggression. Video games are unrelated to youth gun shootings. So my first one is video games are not negatively affecting the crime rates in youth. Video game hardware and software has increased by 204% from 1994 to 2014, and crime rates have been dropping ever since. There have been several studies done in video game violence, but very few on how sales of them affect crime. In a study done by researchers at Villanova University and Rutgers University, they found that when video game sales are at their highest, crime rates tend to drop. There are multiple charts and graphs proving this too. The correlation is always negative, not positive, meaning that the more sales there are for video games, the lower the crime rate is. The juvenile crime index arrest rate was 38% in 2012 and then 63% in 1980. So the crime rate is dropping as it is, so how can more video games create a higher crime rate if it keeps decreasing and the sales of violent video games are increasing? Video games help manage anger and relieve stress rather than cause aggression. Video games are used to relieve stress, and in a study conducted by Texas A&M International University, violent video games can help reduce stress if given a task that affects mood management. Many people play video games to vent their anger and not to cause more. When angry, doing tasks and missions on video games can help youth forget about their anger or even help them understand how to solve the problems they're having in life. In many studies about youth aggression with video games, they exclude a lot of other points that could change outcome of their tests. Christopher J. Ferguson, a psychology professor at Stenson University, said that matching video game conditions more carefully in experimental studies with how they are played in real life makes violent video games' effect on aggression essentially vanish. What he is trying to say is that if one includes different factors like family problems into the studies, such as like maybe abuse or anything like that, it would change the outcome that video games are the problem of the aggression. And then video games are unrelated to youth gun shootings. Only 9.8% of mass shootings from 1982 to 2015 were committed by an 18 or under youth. And for around 40 years, the youth crime has been at all-time low, said by Christopher J. Ferguson. And then Catherine Newman, Dean of Arts and Sciences at Johns Hopkins University, wrote that millions of young people play video games full of fistfights, blazing guns, and body slams, yet only a minuscule fraction of the consumers become violent. Only 12% of 41 attackers studied had an interest in video games. So a really small amount of the attackers had interest in video games. Mostly their interests were more in hunting and other things like that. And Ferguson, the psychology professor, said that if any teen does something illegal or violent, people blame video games. But if there is an older person, such as in their 30s to 50s, some older person somewhere in their 30s to 50s, they don't blame video games, they blame it for some other psychological reason. There were other teen attackers who were interested in history books, and other stuff like that, and no one blames them. No one blames the history books for causing violence. They always go to video games. So video games are not the problem for youth crimes that are out there. Video games are just invented to provide fun and entertainment, not to train killers. Thank you. This is mine.
Oh, thank you. I haven't mentioned it before, but a lot of people are just starting with the topic and then they follow up with an attention device. I'd skip the identification of the topic and start with your attention device and then lead into the proposition, and you do the same kind of thing. However, your proposition is clearly identifiable, and I appreciated that, and I thought that you previewed the contents pretty effectively for the audience as well, although that first point does have negative phrasing in it, so it's a little bit confusing, but I noticed that you were more careful about that on the other points of the supporting structure. The signposts of the supporting structure were not as clear internally as they were in the preview. There was really no transition to the argument about relieving stress. I think you could use a little bit more information on that particular point. The statistical information on crime needs to be explained. You've got this one statistic about how it's 36% today, 68% in 1980, and I don't really understand what those numbers are. That makes it sound like, only 1/3 of teens are committing crimes today, whereas 2/3 of them were committing them in 1980, and those numbers can't be right. That means 1 out of 3 of you in here is probably assaulting or killing somebody. So I don't think that's what the number means. There's something about the way it's been translated by you or the way it appears in the original article that is not clear. I'm not saying that the statistic is not right. I'm just saying that the context and what it means I don't think is correct. However, the inference that you're making from it, that it's lower now than it was before, I think that is clear, and that supports the point that you're presenting there. The correlation to game sales is interesting. I'm not sure if that's the argument that people who go in the other direction are going to be talking about. I'm sure that they'll be specific about particular types of games or the amount of time that people spend playing those games. But your argument there, based on the sale of the games, I think I understand, is one way to try and diminish the general inference that this is going on. I mean, it's one of the big reservation arguments on this point from the other point of view. You do have an argument that tries to criticize the studies that find a relationship there, and I thought that was a good point to include in the argument from your point of view as well. I think you do a pretty good job speaking to the audience as well, and I like the summary at the end where you basically tell us the position and why that position seems valid as you're finishing off. One more chance to convince people to share your point of view. All right, thank you.